So today let's talk about trends. Maybe you've seen this report lately about state of UX, which is great, by the way. It's from the UX collective, and it kind of outlines all the different bits, about layoffs and things of that nature, about specialties and automation and everything in between. But in this video, I want to talk about themes and basically kind of decouple those things which are here to stay and the things which I predict, by the way, because nobody's going to know for sure, to actually influence how we do design and how the design capability and design roles are going to shape up. And so I'm going to cover a few themes, but all of them are going to stem around this massive social, economic, political disruption we're facing right now, the energy crisis and everything in between, which is a root cause for everything we're going to deal with, for years to come, not just next year. And so one of the key knock-on effects of that has been tech layoffs, which were bound to happen at some point. You could just Google of the statistics. What I was looking for, though, is not the tech specifically or the startups, but more so about those brick and mortar businesses, the corporate units, because once they are being shuffled, that's where you have those massive spike of layoffs where everything's whole. And having said that, the tech specifically has been growing over time, right? So and this is for Meta, not to specifically focus on Meta, but we hired a lot and they actually laid off the biggest amount of workforce recently. So the correction was bound to happen, and that was across the board. There is also cycles of the things. For example, the last shakeup, if you would correlate that with the financial crisis in 2008, there was a spike of layoffs, but it shows you that everything else started to recover almost immediately. In just a year, hiring resumed and the process is resumed. And people who have been here for longer, like let's say if you have a decade or more experience, you remember those times how UX and everything design started to pick up and the demand on it actually increases year by year up until now. But as you can see, you have the hiring, you have the layoffs, and it kind of correlates that we always tend to overhire. And I guess why I'm prefacing this video with these things is that you kind of need to have a think who's responsible for that, because these things could be anticipated. Myself, as a design leader who has hired countless of people, even if someone from the business would come and say, hey, look, I have free money, go and hire someone because we need help. What would be playing in the back of my head would be, this too shall pass. The simple line, but the times always cycle and there's always hard times and easier times, and they always come down. Design leaders who have never fired people before tend to overlook that and tend to hire up, and that's what actually happened because it's their responsibility. But also you, if you in the next year are looking for a job, you need to look very deeply if they actually need that role, because again, at some point people are going to overhire, be overconfident, they're maybe not as experienced, or they cannot predict what could happen around the corner, and bam, you have this massive hit. Now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about the actual trends. There's clearly going to be a massive demand in generalists. There has been already. For example, the most senior UXers you're going to work with, or you're going to see, or you're going to hire, are going to be the ones who have a lot of different skills. They have years of experience in a lot of different areas like information architecture, research, design, facilitation, stakeholder management, the soft skills. We have a lot of those things. I definitely foresee as the time gets harder, if we don't course correct quickly, the next year we're going to see a lot of roles being opened up with a lot of hands-on responsibility for the leaders, but also the titles which are going to be do it all. For example, the UX designer as a role has been split into a UX researcher more recently and a product designer. And now it's very rare that you have this do-it-all kind of specialty. And because we overhired, we got a lot of extra people involved. We were comfortable in getting more and more hands and specializing. And to reflect, even the smallest of organizations started to invest for specific teams, which otherwise would have been untold of. And it kind of signified that the maturity of the UX or design or user centricity, however you want to skin it, was increasing. But in reality, there was no kind of like a brutal prioritization or reflection that is this really needed. On a positive side, there's going to be an influx of people who are laid off or who couldn't find otherwise a job, let's say in big tech or some sort of trendy business, whatever, more attractive businesses. They're going to be influxing in these areas which UX hasn't been involved much. It's hence I had that video about why you should consider boring projects. It's exactly for that reason, because businesses who didn't have that much design maturity before, now we're gonna have more people who are looking out. We're looking for maybe more secure places, or they're gonna recognize that their skills would actually be very valuable for business who couldn't afford it before, and maybe even boost some industries which actually didn't have that much attention before. And if you're one of those unfortunate people who got laid off, you should definitely look out there, because businesses are still hiring. The need for good design is going to be there. It doesn't even matter if the opening is, let's say, shows that it's less mature, or maybe it's more UI focused. It's up to you to come in and change it, because not every business, again, has that experience or has worked with proper UX. And here we probably need to pause, because I got an interesting question which actually sparked an idea for this video. But I'd be interested to know where you think UX product design is going next. I personally want to get out, and whilst I'm covering where it's going next or what's going to happen, the I want to get out note is big one, and it's almost like a signal, a theme on its own, because a lot of people, at least in my network and online on like Twitter Spaces, of course they're isolated. If you look for those things, if you connect with certain people, you're definitely going to be bombarded with those messages. But I certainly notice a big growth in people who consider career changes who are already in UX design. And of course, this has been a continuous theme for as far as I remember. There's always been people talking that, hey, how nice it would be to learn to code or things of that nature. But it's interesting because it intensified, especially lately. People kind of see that this UX became a bit messy. It's not as straightforward anymore. There is a massive influx of people who want a career change, ironically, into UX, and people on the other side want to leave now UX to something else. So maybe it's a natural shift, but I foresee that this is gonna be a bit of a theme where people are gonna shift back and forth. We're gonna see more and more demand and more people ready to be generalists, who might be able to have the UI know-how, the user research know-how, but also the implementation, which is great. You know, the OG UXers all know a bit of the data structures, know a lot about information architecture, know a little bit about front-end development, and that's what makes them effective, because they talk the lingo at minimum. So maybe there's something to it. But having said that, if you're one of those people who consider to leave or consider to change the direction, leave a comment down below, because I'm interested to know your rationale behind it. Why do you think that UX is not good for you? As much as you can share, but just out of interest. And another thing is going to be the process. Borrowing from Jeanette Fusella, who came up with this research quadrant, or how lean do you actually go given the challenge. You've probably seen a version of this somewhere. It's all going to come down to axes of how clear it is, like the problem you're solving or the user needs you're trying to answer, the features you want to give it to them. And the risk, of course, reflects here getting it right or getting it wrong. And of course, what you want to do is minimize the risk and lower the uncertainty, which is part of the research and design practice anyway. And now what I see happening in the next couple of years is going to be that we're going to shift this axis closer to the shipping and measure, which is going to probably end up closer to that, if not more. And that's because, again, all those different practices which we kept adding and kept specializing, which are rightful, of course, like research, design operations, specializing in content design, let's say specialist copywriters, things of that nature, which previously only certain businesses or agencies could afford. Now almost everybody had that specialty. It's going to be consolidated, and as we gonna get into more of a generalist ways of working, or at least certain situations, certain regions are gonna get into that, you're gonna see a lot of that shift, because the generalists who does it all are probably gonna move much faster. Of course, they're gonna make more mistakes, and they're gonna probably validate things in a leaner way, they're gonna design things in a leaner way, but that's ultimately the nature of it. And if, let's say, a business before could afford a design team, and now we can only afford a few individuals, those responsibilities are going to be shared. But I see that maturity in the end are of course going to be dropping, and it's going to be up to design leaders to maintain it. As mentioned before, businesses who've been doing well or corporate established units probably not even going to feel that much of a difference. If they're unfazed, or if there's not massive drop in their users or customers, they don't have to really adapt or change their ways of working. And hence, going back to the point where I think a lot of designers are going to shift to safer pastures, could also be one of those themes to look out for. And now another theme to debunk, and I think it's going to be a bit of a fad, is of course that blockchain Web3 type of gradient filled experiences which are poor usability by definition, or they lack a lot of thinking, or heuristics are spoiled. We just look fancy and we look futuristic and cyberpunk and break every rule on a table. It's not going to be too much of a trend, at least not for the time being, because we're too deep into that flat space and too deep into our super readily producible and ready to work with design systems. The design systems and the flat design kind of work hand in hand, and they, to oversimplify, been done that way, and we keep investing a lot of money into those things in different design organizations because they're easier to maintain and it's much easier to prototype for anyone, let's say, and they support the design for all vision, which is kind of heading towards that automation, but that's a topic for another day. And so because of the deep-rooted dependencies, I don't see it spreading anywhere else besides those specific niches. And of course, there's going to be a lot of outliers, and a lot of those experiences are going to be in like web space or brochureware. Certain niches have always benefited from very specific design which broke the rules, and that's just going to persist in my head. Now I'm going to throw a bit of a spanner in the works, especially for that UX trends reports, but I don't think automation is going to play that big of a role just yet. Whilst it's moving very fast, I don't think it's at the point where designers would use it daily, or I don't think it's at the point, or it's going to be at the point for the next year or two, even maybe more, where the designers would start using it as part of their workflow. And again, it's kind of following up on all the other points that because we're going to need to move a bit leaner, you're going to probably default to the tools or the tools which support that linear workflow. Granted, AI could do it in a click of the fingers to give you some sort of results, but it doesn't mean they are right. And of course, we're still going to be playing with those tools, and it's still going to be a theme, a signal, so to speak, where designers are going to explore them and see how they can apply it. But it's not going to be that immediate, especially for design teams. And of course, there's always a flip side to things. So I know a few brands who are already making e-commerce website AI, which basically generates, let's say, website designs and things of that nature. So all of those things, you could kind of maybe have it as a signal, as a developing, emerging trend for maybe the next few years. Still, if you zoom out enough, in the next couple of years, we're going to be on a path to recovery. And because of a distribution of that design maturity, or individuals who experience what good design looks like, and hopefully we're going to infiltrate all the different markets which didn't have that, when the time is right for us to recover and start off hiring more designers, we're going to get to a better stage because we're going to have a better benchmark and a better baseline to push off of. I want to also leave you with a call to action to take these themes which should inspire you to learn more and develop more, because with every single impactful spike, things which just don't work out just out of nowhere, you can't predict them, shows you and signals to you how necessary are the good technical skills from a UX perspective, but also understanding how everything else around design works, because nothing is just about design, nothing is just about user research. It's all about delivering some sort of outcome and impact for a business, but also how it influences the knock-on effects on the world, the sustainability and other factors. So you need to expand your skill sets. You need to keep on developing and learning. It's almost like a prerequisite for anyone working in tech.